Welcome to Restore the Glory podcast. My name is Jake Kim.
And I'm Bob Schutz.
We're two Catholic therapists sharing what we've learned personally and professionally to help you on the journey of restoration.
If you've been blessed by our podcast, please prayerfully consider partnering with us on Patreon. Your support will help cover the cost to produce the podcast, but will also give you access to exclusive content like monthly reflections and special live stream teachings. Go to patreon.com/restoretheglory and join the mission of experiencing the restoration of our God-given glory.
Hey, Bob. Good to see you again. And I am really excited about where we're going to go today. We have numerous guests on at various times. And in particular, we've had a few guests on that have talked about, I think, something that, Bob, we're fond of and talk a lot about, which is generically in the psychological world called parts work or internal family systems for those who are a little bit more into that domain and world. And we have somebody who I would consider is an expert in that domain and is actually a associate or business partner with a previous guest we had, Dr. Peter Malinowski. So, Bob, introduce our guest for us today.
Yeah, Gerry Crete is a therapist in Atlanta and also an author. He's, in fact, part of how we got connected for this podcast is he sent me his book, Litanies of the Heart, which is just brand new. And well, by the time people receive this, it'll be out a month or so. I first saw you, Gerry, on Matt Fred on the Pints for Aquinas and realized that you were his therapist for a while, although you can't say that, but you said it. He said it online, right? Right. And so I got to know you through the interviews on Pints for Aquinas and then found out that you were Peter's partner, and then we had communication related to your book. So I loved reviewing your book, and we'll talk more about that later.
Welcome, Gerry.
Welcome.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your background, your family, that kind of thing.
Sure. Well, I'm originally from Ottawa, Canada. So
that's a wonderful thing to hear. I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah. Yes. So I got married there, and I had 3 kids there, and we moved to Atlanta, Georgia, over 25 years ago. So I've been in Atlanta for that long. And originally, I actually was working as a teacher in Ontario, teaching history and English and religious studies, actually, because I don't know, it might not be the same out west, but in Ontario, the Catholic schools are publicly funded. And I actually taught religion as well as history and enjoyed that. But we moved to Atlanta. And then I moved into working a little bit of teaching in Atlanta, but then I became a school counselor, pursued a master's degree in counseling and did that for a while. And then eventually did a doctorate and moved into private practice where I work as a professional counselor and a marriage and family therapist. And I'm currently run my own practice, Transfiguration Counseling, here in Atlanta. But we actually have therapists in multiple states now.
Wonderful.
And so you and Peter are just doing the other project together?
Yes, because I'm constantly doing more than I should. My sister just called me the Energizer Bunny the other day. But I am with Peter Malinowski, and I are very good friends, and we've been in a group together, as a support group for
awesome.
Kind of depth psychology group. And and then so we started Souls and Hearts a number of years ago, really to bring Catholicism and psychology together and provide resources for people. Yeah. And but more and more, we're seeing this ministry as focused on human formation and focused on kind of integrating the faith with parts work, or as you mentioned, internal family systems.
I have sent many people to Souls and Hearts and have heard lots of wonderful things by numerous people. So it is something that I was very grateful to see when I finally found it. And it's amazing how great things exist out there and you don't know about them. And you think, oh, okay, I've seen everything. And then something else comes along that's just awesome. So again, I would really encourage you listeners to go check out Souls and Hearts. There's tons of practicals, which I think is super helpful, like the prayer things and there's so much on the site. Like, Gerry, you strike me already as similar to Peter in that you guys are thorough, a lot of output. And so there's a lot to receive just on that site alone. So, and then there's groups that people can join. So I just want to do a big plug for that as well. I think it's great stuff that is going on. You guys did there. Gerry, tell us a little bit. Were you a psychologist when you came out of the womb, or what happened there? Yeah.
I think I was. I grew up my family was dysfunctional enough to give me a lot of material growing up. So I was always observing and making notes. And I think I remember early on, I had this priest who was a wonderful mentor for me. And he introduced me to both healing prayer. He did a lot of, you might be familiar with, I think it was Matthew and Dennis Lynn had, material they did way back, I guess the 80s or whatnot.
Yeah.
And he used that with me. So I had some pretty amazing healing experiences with this one priest.
Wow.
But then he introduced me to Myers-Briggs.
Oh, okay.
And he had me do my, Myers-Briggs temperament. I think there was a book called Please Understand Me or whatnot that had in the back, it had a little assessment you could do for yourself to figure out which, I'm an INFJ, as it turns out. Well, I went around doing this assessment on everybody in my family and everybody I could, here I was at like 18, 19 and had to know everybody's temperament. So this was well before I studied counseling and psychology.
Wow. You were offering the Myers-Briggs to people just as a guy who found it interesting. That's cool. That's super cool. And I think Bob and I would definitely resonate with you of a lot of material to work with growing up. And so you just, it was a natural fit to go into the field. But so you start as a teacher and tell us about the shift there from, because I know mine, and I find that part of my story a highlight of when you went, wait a second, I think I might want to do this with people professionally and really because you're kind of in a helping role as a teacher, but there's a shift there to wanting to be a psychologist. Bring us into that.
Yes. Well, I think that honestly, I've loved every job I've had. So I loved being a teacher, and I mostly worked with high school students, enjoyed it. And it was just one of those things. I was working at a Catholic school in Atlanta, and the principal came to me. They were expanding the school from elementary, middle school to high school. And she was like, I think you would be a great counselor for our school.
Wow.
And so I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And so I basically started a master's degree because of that.
Wow.
And so I enjoyed doing that work. But I was having a discernment period a few years into it, a discernment period between the diaconate or possibly doing a doctorate. Wow. And I didn't really know which path for sure. And at that time. And so I just said, Lord, you just tell me where to go. I'm going to apply to both. Of course, I get into both. And so I spent a year in a diaconate formation program while I was starting a doctorate.
Wow.
And I loved it. And what I realized about the diaconate program is that I loved one of the components. Well, two of the components. They talked about three: liturgy, counseling, like pastoral counseling, and education.
Wow.
And so I felt like education, no problem. Pastoral counseling sounds great. Liturgy, hey, I love liturgy, but I didn't actually feel particularly called to support the liturgy. Back when I was younger, I had been a sacristan, I had been a altar server, I had been a reader, I'd done all those things, but I didn't feel like moved or called to do that. So I realized the only reason I was in the diaconal program was that I loved all the books that they gave you and enjoyed going to class.
That's awesome.
And I was thinking, well, as I was, because I had started to move into, I started working part-time in a counseling center.
Okay.
And it was a Catholic counseling center. I had an amazing mentor, a marriage and family therapist, who the beautiful Catholic woman. And so she mentored me, and I just realized I loved working with couples. I loved working with individuals. And more I realized I really liked working in the area of trauma, helping people resolve past hurts.
Wow.
And that became my passion. And so that naturally led, like when I started my doctorate, I was thinking I would do something around counselor education. And how to promote, maybe even counseling in schools, take it to a higher level or whatnot.
Wow.
But by the end of it, my dissertation was on helping or counseling interventions for male survivors of childhood sexual abuse and
Wow.
healing in relationship. So I really, had a complete turnaround as I explored both doing the work and doing the research.
Man, there's so much there. Bob, I'll let you. I'm already
Yeah,
excited. I
I
always
don't
have
know.
follow-ups.
Yeah, I don't know which one to
Yeah.
pick out of all.
Yes, that's so good.
Maybe as you got into the trauma work, when did the revelation of parts work come? And was it IFS or was it something else in the beginning?
Well, I would say, it's a progression. I mean, my focus at the beginning of my clinical work was emotionally focused couples therapy.
Yeah, yeah.
Sue Johnson, a lot of attachment theory, love that stuff. But then I got trained in EMDR, eye movement, desensitization reprocessing, which is, using bilateral stimulation to in accessing memories and healing. And so it's very experiential and powerful. I even got so excited, I started doing training, like facilitating trainings, and
Wow.
became an EMDR consultant. So
Wow.
I still have that. I love that work, and it transformed my practice really. And everything I learned about EMDR, not just the technique itself that people know about, but the whole approach. And that led beautifully into discovering parts. So I learned about IFS, and I did some different kinds of trainings and things to learn about IFS and read everything I could. I've actually done more training in ego state therapy. And ego state therapy kind of predates IFS. And it was developed by John and Helen Watkins in the 60s and 70s. And they come out of a more psychodynamic background, and they bring in clinical hypnosis is more in their background, and they work with more severe cases, you could say, dissociative disorders and so on. Even I think John Watkins back in the 70s used ego state therapy to, help solve some major crime
Wow.
with a serial killer in California. I'm going to blank out on the name, but it was big in the 70s. Anyway, so this whole idea of parts, and the idea that within us is a multiplicity. Within us are multiple. You call them ego states, call them parts, subpersonalities, what have you. There's a multiple within us, if you will. So I then just went nuts learning about this. I started applying it, what I've been trained in, what I was learning. I started using it clinically. I was integrating it with EMDR sometimes, but I was using it sometimes on its own. And the change in my clients, by and large, was remarkable.
Wow.
I mean, I would have people after 1 week or 2 weeks say, I'm relating to myself completely differently. I am, relating to other people differently. I'm less reactive.
Wow.
This is amazing.
Yes.
So I basically fell in love with this whole approach. And pretty much now 98% of the work I do clinically is parts work or EMDR.
Wow. I so want to nerd out right now on the therapy world stuff, but I'm worried our listeners would be like, what are they talking about? Because I'm like, EMDR parts work, that's when my practice was active, that was a lot. So I would have added in prayer therapy or, inner healing prayer. Those were like the trifecta of what I did clinically. And so there's a lot of overlap, Gerry, with what you're describing your clinical work. I'm like EMDR helped reveal parts work and ego state. I vividly remember first learning about ego state therapy, and a mentor of mine introduced. So there's a lot of overlap. But so listeners, this is my gift to you to not nerd out where 90% of you would be no longer interested. But Gerry, Bob, and I would have a really fun conversation. But okay, so I think the part maybe that everybody's curious or would love to hear about is that's quite a statement, Gerry, to say, I'm doing therapy and EMDR is great. And that's a helpful intervention. And I'm sure you and I alike have seen fruit there. But then you said, I started doing IFS work. Let's just call it that for now, parts work. And people were having remarkable breakthroughs. Can you bring us into what was happening? What were you doing? Why do you think fruit was coming out of that? then we'll maybe get more to how people could take that home with them.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and it's interesting, right? Because I will say parts work normally for a few reasons. One, my primary training is actually more ego state therapy than IFS, although I have both.
Yeah.
And also because I do acknowledge like Richard Schwartz and IFS have some key things that they have brought forward that are amazing, that are super helpful, that are super user friendly, super adaptable. That whereas ego state therapy sometimes is so dense, sometimes in the way that Watkins explain it, it's like it goes over most people's heads. It's so complex. So I'll just say that. But I will say also that there were aspects of IFS that I did not appreciate, and as a Catholic, and that I had deep concerns about.
Okay.
So that's a little bit why I just go with parts work, because I integrate different kinds of approaches into something that works really well for me. Okay, so that's sort of my upfront statement. But to answer your question, once I was able to do what in IFS they talk about, which is helping the client identify their parts and unblend. They use the word unblend.
Yeah.
I found kind of super helpful kind of way to put it, and that they have these different categories of parts that people usually get really quickly. So they get the idea of it. And so the idea that all of a sudden you can really come to terms and actually communicate with different parts of the self is super powerful. So in other words, if all of a sudden I'm upset with somebody because I don't know, whatever maybe it's a kid, maybe it's one of my kids, a teenager or something, and they did something for the 50th time that I asked them not to, and I'm upset. Yeah. Well, I can actually I can pause. If I pause long enough and I recognize there's a part of me that is reacting right now to this teenager. Well, if I can connect with that part and understand what that part is trying to do, like what's its intention and what is it burdened with? Like, what is it kind of like, what's it holding on to that isn't helpful? That I can actually like connect with the part and help relieve it of that burden. If I can't, I might not necessarily do that in an instant, but I can at least acknowledge it. And that part can kind of relax a little bit and pause. And I can gain possibly some access to what I say is the inmost self.
Mm.
Schwartz just says it's the self. Ego state therapy doesn't really have a good definition of it at all.
Okay.
But I go with St. Paul and I say this inmost self.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so if that inmost self is able to connect with the part of me that's upset with my teenager, then I'm able to bring compassion. I'm able to bring clarity. I'm able to bring some patience. I'm able to bring whatever to bear on myself, within myself.
Yes.
And then as a result, turn around and respond in possibly a really different way with that teenager. That'll be a lot more effective. And so when that happens and you talk to the teenager and you're like, listen, I've asked you several times and, there's a part of me that's really upset that you're still doing this. Can we talk about it? Suddenly the tone is different, right? Than when a parent might, why did you do this again? This is the 50th time I've asked you and you don't care about me or something. Well, and we're not doing that anymore. And all of a sudden we're seeing a different response in others. And internally, we just feel better. It's just nicer to be in better connection with our parts.
Yeah.
What I like in your book is you go back to St. Paul. I do not do what I want to do. I do the thing that I hate. Part of me here and part of me there. And, the 1 Corinthians, and the body is made up of many parts. And then Aristotle, and then you go back to the fall. I really like the integration of the whole of, you go through a lot of scripture, Old Testament, New Testament, integrating this, which is really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But my question is from a more recent source, which is Pope Benedict XVI. And so I want, if you will, to address this comment that I love and use in all of our conferences. Address this in relation to parts work, okay? And Pope Benedict XVI said, anyone who wants to heal man must see him in his wholeness and know that his only healing can be God's love. All right. So I know you see in that way too. So for our listener who's saying, well, what's all this about parts when we're a whole person? Can you speak to the connection between what Pope Benedict is saying and parts work?
Right. I think he's speaking to the fact that God is the ultimate healer, for one thing. And
Amen.
that in a sense, we are a unity, right? Like we are one human person. And so ontologically, we're not like, we don't have like 10 ontological beings that live within us. We are one being. And so the parts are more of I would almost say a phenomenological kind of way of relating within, so our parts might seem like they're separate people, but they're not separate people.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's just the interior multiplicity that is sort of inherent in being human, is how I would put it. But what we want and what we're aiming for is not that all of this multiplicity within is going to get all smulched or mulched up together into one big blob, right? That's not what we mean by integration. We mean that it will all of our different parts with their different strengths, with their different qualities, with their different resources and so on, will work together in a beautiful harmony, actually. And so as a human person, we're able to, our inmost self perhaps is able to draw on different parts of the self as needed to serve whatever function, whether that's loving others, whether that's loving God, and so on. And so the healing that has to happen is going to be ultimately from God in terms of to the whole person. So I would wholeheartedly agree with what I understood there from Pope Benedict. I would say one way to look at this, though, is to go Thomistic on you a little bit, and say that Saint Thomas Aquinas talks about being a friend to oneself. And he says that we have to love ourselves before we can love others and even God fully. And so what does that mean to be a friend to oneself? What does it mean to love oneself in a proper way? Because we know that the patristics and so on, lots of early church writers will talk about self-love as a bad thing, right? Like self-love is, they mean it more like self-preoccupation, selfishness, and all this. But proper self-love, I say, is where we are, and this is how I define it and how I understand it now, is that this inmost self, which is our spiritual center, which is, I would describe as like a mediator between God in his grace and his love and all of our whole human person. So therefore all of our parts. And so that, our inmost self most reflects that image of God. And I hear different writers, St. Athanasius calls that inmost self, he calls it the mirror of the soul, kind of reflecting God. Other monastics and so on talk about it as maybe the cave of the heart or the eye of the soul, or you hear all this language that they're trying to explain this dwelling place deep within that's a spiritual center. I relate it all to the inmost self and this sort of core part of our heart. And so there's essential goodness there and in a way of an ability to mediate grace. And so that inmost self is able to love and heal and bring harmony to our inner system. And that's the wholeness that I think Benedict is talking about. That's that harmony. And when that happens, when all our parts, in a sense, are evangelized and all our parts are able to be unburdened of whatever they're carrying from past traumas and so on, because what we have happen is our past traumas, sometimes they're relegated to a certain part that holds on to it, or certain emotions of pain and shame and fear are relegated to certain parts that hold on to it. And then the system pushes those parts out of conscious memory because it's too much to bear. And those become what we call in IFS are called exiles. In ego state therapy, we would just say their parts or ego states that are outside of conscious awareness. They might be very far outside, but they will show up sometimes because they get, our defenses come down, or we're tired, or we're triggered by something, and they show up again. And then the system reacts. So we get all this turmoil inside. St. James talks about our members are at war with each other. So we have almost this internal war going on. And so it really is up to that inmost self to bring healing to this whole system.
There's so I'm loving this conversation because these are the domains I love to think about. And I'm also conscious of the listener who might be like, oh boy, we just went to another level. So I want to try to summarize what we're saying in everyday language so that, and then let's see if the language is accurate. And then we can we'll move deeper into what most people I think, are looking for, which is what you're describing, Gerry, as this harmony. And we can nuance and use different words there. But here's basically what I'm hearing us say. So, Gerry, when you nuance something, sorry, let me, that should be point two. Point one is, I think everybody has this idea of, why did I just do that? I do what I actually don't want to do. And then right after that, I have this very different experience. And so you mentioned this phenomenological experience of oneself, which is basically, as I'm going through life, I'm experiencing and encountering myself and trying to make sense of my everyday doing and feeling and acting and what do I do with all of this? And so it does require a little. You have to be open to being reflective if this parts work and healing is ever going to make any sense, or you're going to go anywhere. You have to be willing to go, why did I do that? And I think most people, when they get into their everyday world, they pause and go, part of me, and this is such a normal everyday language, we go, man, part of me really wants to finish this project or pray or, I don't know, be kind to the kids today. And another part of me is like, I don't want to have anything to do with anybody. And I kind of don't like anybody. Or a part of me is really sad and a part of me is confused why I'm sad. I think if you just pause a little bit and reflect on your everyday experience, you go, man, I'm not operating in one unified approach constantly throughout the day. That's I live like that. And with clients, you can see that. And I think the extreme version of that is a diagnosable issue, which dissociative identity disorder, there's a lot of people who call, BS with that. And I don't want to get into that whole, controversy, or not. It's not a controversy, more the debate there. But I've witnessed it and seen it. People with severe dissociation where they like change how they interact, and it's dramatic, even to the point of people who lose consciousness, go into another experience, a state or ego state or part. Then they wake up as another part and go, how did I get here? Like, I've witnessed that with my own eyes and seen that in my own clinical practice. So that's an extreme version. You back off of that and you go, man, part of me wants to do this, part of me doesn't. But then what do we do with all of this? How does one experience an integration, a harmony, a oneness within ourselves? And I think you could look at the Trinity and go, the Trinity's never going, why did you do that, Holy Spirit? And the Father's like, I can't believe, Jesus, you went and said that. There's not disunity within. There's perfect harmony in their oneness, and yet there's distinction there. And so that's been one of the things I've wondered, is if we're made in the image and likeness of the Trinity, there is some possibility that that image is born within us, and there is a unity in distinction. There's distinctive parts of us that also have unity, because that's the image that we're made in of God. Okay. But if you keep walking down the road, you go, man, I'm really not in harmony right now. What do I do about that? And I think here's where we're coming into contact and going, okay, now I really want to talk more about this, how does this work in this unity stuff? So first of all, would you guys like go thumbs up? That's a fair enough summary. And
you said that beautifully, I think. Yeah, you said it really well. In fact, I use examples just like that. Like there's a part of me after work that wants to work out and go to the gym and get super healthy. Another part of me just want to binge watch TV and eat a bag of chips, you know?
Yep.
So, and then who wins? So the question is, is there a self that is overseeing that? Is there a self that is making the decisions, or is it just one of the parts kind of, so to speak, takes over, and now the other one is just sort of suppressed in some way?
Yes.
Right. And so gaining what you call self-awareness, and gaining a sense of being aware all the time of our parts and accessing ourself all the time is a practice.
Yes.
And it's something that once you start doing and you start living that way, you're just in touch with your parts all the time. And you're just in touch with this inmost self, which is your spiritual center. So it links really well to a lot of concepts like, prayer without ceasing. What is St. Paul talking about? What is it? Or Hildebrand talks about true consciousness. This idea, or Brother Lawrence and practicing the presence of God, like, what does it mean to be walking with God always? What does it mean to be walking with one's own and awareness of one's own inmost self and one's parts? And so, what, even in this book, what I wanted to do was, I didn't want it just to be intellectual knowledge, because I could spend all day there, as you know, and as I think you can too. But I wanted it to have an experiential piece. And so every chapter has an experiential piece, which is a meditation or a prayer that will actually help you identify your parts. And some of them are about unblending, what I was talking about that way. Like, when a part is so blended, it's like a total eclipse of the heart. Like, it's like the moon is covering the sun and you don't see the sun anymore. You don't see the self anymore, because that part is so like in control, so to speak. And so we learn to unblend in order to get a view of it and to be able to relate to it. It's changing. So I think this is a whole new, it's almost a spiritual practice, but it's a psychological practice, and it sort of combines both. And so I'm hoping that with these meditations, you'll do that. The same with, like, at Souls and Hearts, if you join the Resilient Catholic community or whatnot, they're walking you through exercises and how to do it. So it's not just an intellectual exercise.
Yeah, good. Let me kind of comment on the other side of this, as you talk about the part of you that wants to work out and the part of you that wants to rest and relax. And what's the difference between the part and the desire? Wouldn't it be accurate to say, I desire to work out, but I also desire to lay here? What takes the desire and makes it a part, as opposed to just an experience of a desire?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting question, really. It's almost like the will, right? Too, because I would see the will as one thing,
right?
And parts kind of participate in it in some sense, but it is the human person that wills ultimately and that actually makes a choice. So I don't think it's fair to say, well, my part made me do that. Right. My part did it, the rest of me didn't do it, or something. Yeah. So these are linked, but I think the parts influence the will. And I think that but you're talking about desire. So I think what they would say is that the parts themselves may have conflicting desires. But the question would be, what is the motivation behind that desire? So if my desire is, like, I might have the desire to rest, and that might be based on a reality that I'm worn out and I'm tired. So there's a good intention, and that the desire itself is not bad or anything. So there's a good intention to that. But the way that I might be thinking, or I may have learned through history, through trauma, whatever, a way of coping, the ways that I might try to achieve that may be dysfunctional, unhealthy, or unhelpful, or have negative consequences. But that part is kind of like, it's like a well-developed neural pathway. It's just, that's what it knows what to do. This is the fix that I've learned. Maybe I've learned it since I was 12, and I'm still doing it. And so the intervention comes in isn't so much to say, oh, the desire is necessarily bad, although it depends what we're talking about, whether we're talking about an underlying intention or a desire for something we've developed, like overeating or something, or over consuming alcohol or something. And that desire may be disordered, but the intention underneath might be good. And so what you're doing in the therapy part of it would be, when you're working with somebody, is you're actually in there with them, helping them connect their inmost self to this part that has that desire, and you're working it with them and helping the part learn, maybe there's a new way that I can get my needs met. Maybe there's a better way, healthier way that I can now learn to have recreation, right? And meanwhile, you've got the self also balancing that with the other part, right? That's going, we need to hit the gym, we need to do this, we need to do that, which itself, that might sound like a better thing, but that could be burdened also with the desires that are also dysfunctional or unhealthy in some way, because maybe underlying that motivation is like, oh, if I don't look a certain way, people aren't going to love me, or I'm not going to be worthwhile. If I'm not muscular, or if I'm not thin enough or something, I'm unlovable. And so that may be driving that part as well. So you got these parts with these strong motivations. I don't know if you would say desires, but these strong desires that may be in some way influenced by an unhealthy belief.
Yeah. And so the unhealthy belief may be something like a dad who, whenever a son was resting after school, yells at him, screams at him, and says, "You're lazy, but get up and work and do what you're supposed to do." And that might have been unconscious
Hmm.
behind this
Yeah.
battle of desire between working out and doing there. But what you would do in therapy is draw out, okay, where is this coming from? Where is this motivation coming from?
Yeah.
What's that part? The part would be the part that's wounded by the dad, right?
Right. And I would actually think, I bring a little more of an ego state therapy emphasis rather than IFS and what I'm about to say. They talk about antijacs. I would say that the part that is motivated by get up, you're lazy, blah, 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 is a part that looks and sounds often just like that dad you just described.
Yep.
So we develop a part that's extremely critical, often because it comes from a parent or from somewhere, some messaging. And it really looks, and so unintervention there is to connect, right, with that part and be almost able to say, you know what, you're not your dad. You know you're not your dad. Sometimes it's funny. The part might go, what? The part thinks it's the dad. Like that's how embedded that is, right? And it's almost like, oh, and what are you afraid will happen if you stop being like your dad?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'll be a lazy butt and I won't get anything done. Oh, okay. That's what you learned back when you were 9, right? Okay. Maybe is there a new way that we can help our system to not be a lazy butt, but maybe we don't need to be as critical and as harsh as dad was, and then they start, you kind of have to get the part to agree to try something new.
Yeah.
And then you actually have to try it and see if it works. And so the part actually starts to believe it. It's not just something you tell it.
I think one of the things that we're doing here that I hope this will help our listeners is Gerry, when you said phenomenology, a penny dropped for me. I don't know if I've ever heard that before in relation to parts work. And I've been sitting and pondering, and I went, if you zoom out from our conversation right now, we're talking about the experience of the human person, which is a phenomena, and a unique experience would be a phenomena. And so we're trying to use words to describe experiences that human beings have. And I would argue they're universal. You can go to the deepest jungles of wherever, and you would still have quote unquote parts working. The phenomena is this umbrella under which we're trying to find words to describe what goes on in the human person. So, a part of me, a desire within me, my flesh. What's the difference between all of those? I don't know. And I'm not really going to that level of nuance. It's more of we're finding language to describe how we do and what we do as human beings with the goal of what God, I think, desires, which is union with Him, union within ourselves, union with our neighbor that results in peace and the other fruits of the Spirit. So it's a phenomena we're trying to articulate and work with. And another thing, listeners, so if you're sitting there going, inmost self, that sounds so weird. It sounds so like psycho crappy babble. Like, so just hear this quote for a second from the Catechism. It's paragraph 2563. The heart is the dwelling place where I am, where I live. And it goes on to say, the heart is the place to which I withdraw. Here we go. Listen to this. The heart is our hidden center. And so the Catechism is describing, I think, a similar phenomena as inmost self and using the word heart. So is it my inmost self or is it my heart? You could probably use either word. It's describing the same reality. So I don't want you to get caught up because I think especially in the West, we have a very, I'll call it Greek understanding of concepts where if it's not precise and accurate and perfectly articulated in a line, literally described, I can't believe it to be true. Where there's a more, like if you take the Hebrew people, they had a much different way of understanding things. Everything didn't have to be in a line precise, like toy soldiers making sense. They left room for understanding. And so I just want to acknowledge that a lot of us walk in with this more I think I'm accurate in this, a more Greek way of understanding things. And if A plus B does not equal C, then there's absolutely no way this can be true. Where there are other ways to go, there's a phenomena, and we're trying to understand the phenomena. And ultimately, I think people are like, Jake, I don't give a crap about the phenomena. I want to feel better, make my problems go away. That's where everybody's probably wanting. And I think the point we're trying to make is this is one of the ways that can occur. And so here are three, let's just call this all the same. Here are three psychologists who two aren't practicing, one continuing to practice. And I'll speak for myself, and I can say in my life, as well in the lives of people that I've worked with, this articulation of the phenomenon we're describing helped a lot of people work through stuck points and difficulties. And I'll give one practical, and Gerry, I want to ask you, how do you do the practical? Here was one of the practicals I used. I would ask people to think of a table that they liked that was calm. Maybe it was a dinner table, a picnic table, a boardroom table, whatever table. For some reason, I worked with numerous men. They like to pick a boardroom table. And I said, okay, in this boardroom, the head of the table is going to be your heart or your true self. And that seat is for your true self. And I'm going to invite Jesus to sit beside you at the head of that table. Now, there's a whole bunch of other chairs, and we're going to fill those chairs with the various parts of you. And then randomly in life, we're going to throw this piece of paper on the middle of the table called marriage or my wife or traffic or whatever. And then you get to watch everybody react to it. And I might have a young part that's like, I'm terrified. I hate traffic. And another part's like, I hate people. They're the worst. And you got scared and angry. And the head of the table is trying to organize it so you can get home. That was one of the analogies I used, and people found that helpful because they could go, oh, there's the part over there sitting at the table with me who's really sad. And, oh, there's another part over there who's really angry. Gerry, how do you do that kind of stuff to help people move forward?
Well, first of all, I love what you're doing there. That's amazing. And that is parts work. No question. Actually, a Canadian psychiatrist by the name of George Fraser, who's in Ottawa, he's in his 80s now, and he developed what's called the dissociative table technique, which is pretty much what you're describing. And you invite your parts to be around a table, and you connect with them. Sandra Paulson, who is an EMDR expert and ego state therapy expert, who I adore, she also endorsed my book. I was very honored by that.
Oh, that's cool.
She's fantastic. And she kind of developed it further into like the conference room, kind of what you're talking about. So, and you can do things in the conference room too. Like you can have, have passed around a mic. You can have different, you can use the room in various ways when you do it. And I have found in general with my clients, the conference room works and it's fine, but I have come to really use what I call the internal living room.
Interesting.
And I will invite the person. It can be a living room with couches and stuff. They can decorate it and design it however they like. If they prefer to have it be an outside deck, if they prefer to be in a more of a rec room, they can make it whatever they want. But I tend to go with living room, and I actually imagine an entire house, or help to see the soul as a whole house.
Yeah.
And to me, that lines up very well with St. Teresa of Avila's interior castle and all this. But one reason I do that, and for a few reasons, is one is the parts can live in different rooms in the house, and they can come out of the rooms and come down into the living room, or they can stay in their rooms if they don't want to be there. And we can, and especially for an exile part who's not been in the house, they've been living somewhere outside the house, and usually they're children. And once you connect with those inner, the inner child, so to speak, and you actually do whatever unburdening process and your healing process with them, and you're inviting them into the house where they can come into the living room, meet the other parts. They can find their own bedroom. You can decorate the bed. Like my internal child's bedroom is going to have Star Wars, action figures and things on the walls and stuff like that. Yours might have a basketball hoop and, whatever. And so it's going to be whatever that child needs and wants, and you get to have fun with it, and it's theirs. And it's not their old childhood home.
Mm.
It's a new home within within their system now.
Yes.
But that inner living room, I love. And so you invite them to look inward, picture that living room, and then you can check and see, are there any parts in there already? And then it's a little bit of, okay, what do you notice about that part?
Mm.
I don't typically start with like a whole group of parts usually, unless that's just what the client says is there.
Got it.
But I usually start with like, who do you notice? Or sometimes you invite a part. Hey, I'd like to invite the part to come into the living room that was, really stressed out yesterday.
Yes.
And then you spend time noticing, seeing, if you can. Now, not everybody visualizes. Many people can. Some people more, they're sort of sensing it, and that's fine. But you help them kind of connect with the part, hear and listen. It sounds funny to say because it's so weird sounding, but you're actually asking them, like, what does the part want you to know about their experience? And your goal, and what, as a therapist, you're guiding that person and hopefully their self, like their inmost self, to like align, at least to understand what that intention of that part is, whatever it might be.
Yes.
Because if you can do that, and I'm always saying things like, if it feels right to you, can you let this part know that you get that you understand? You might not agree with what they chose to do with it, but that you understand why they feel the way they do.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, if there's a part, like even that critical dad we were talking about, maybe he's been a critical dad for 20 years inside that person, thinking and being like, it's a thankless job, right?
Yeah.
But if his intention was to prevent bad things from happening, would it feel right? Would it feel okay with you to thank that part, even if you don't like how he's doing it? But man, he's had a thankless job for 20 years trying to protect you, and it's going to be a hard pill to swallow. That maybe it hasn't been always helpful, but can we thank him for his effort?
Right.
And it's amazing how the part softens. Once it's like somebody's thanking me, somebody's even seeing me and understanding it from my perspective. It sounds so weird to say, but the part actually softens, and then you can start working with it. And then you can, once you get that relationship, like you would with any other person, you're able to say, can we try something else? Would you try this? Or would you sit back and let me try this? If we're working with an exile or whatnot, and then I'll come back to you and find out what you felt about that. And it's amazing then if they sit back and they let you do something, like maybe you're working with this inner child part and you just love on that part and the part responds, right? And you see, whoa, my gosh, it reveals this inner young part, this wounded part that's been carrying this terrible burden of pain or something. And when that is lifted because you love the part and you're suddenly this part is like lovable and joyful and playful. It's a child. Maybe it's an 8-year-old or something.
Yes.
And then you look back at the part that had been protecting it, like mean old dad. And that part's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. And it's like beautiful to watch. And then you say, yeah, we understand you didn't realize it. What do we want to do? We want to give this part a hug. Is that okay? And you bring them together. And so all that kind of work brings about that harmony.
Yes.
A couple of things here. One is I'm realizing as we're speaking that you do a really good job at the beginning of the book of defining the major parts. And we're just talking about them. And, some people have listened before to when Peter was on, but Dr. Peter. But if we can just kind of identify you're talking about the inmost self, which is the core person, the spiritual being made in the image and likeness of God. You're talking about exiles, which are more the parts that have been disowned, and mostly because they're wounded and they're carrying, when you're talking about burden, they're carrying pain, they're carrying some kind of a task that they're burdened with, right? And then protectors are different kinds of protectors. You mentioned 2 different kinds of protectors. Can you name those?
Yeah, in IFS, they refer to managers and they refer to firefighters, and they're both protectors, and they're usually trying to protect that exile or protect the system, maybe even from the exile. But a manager is going to be proactive. So a manager part is going to wants to do the right thing. So this might be like, If it was me, it might be my therapist part, or it might be my dad part, or worker bee part, or something. And so they're very concerned about what others think often. And so they're considerate usually. They work hard usually. They're very task oriented, and they think that if you do the right thing and you do things well, that you'll keep those exiles at bay and it will work well. But what happens, of course, in life is that it doesn't always work, right? And the managers get overwhelmed, or something happens and the exile still appears in some way, so that pain, shame, or fear, or sadness, whatever it is, starts to overwhelm the system. And then you have they call it a firefighter part, which is basically firefighters don't care about what other people think. And they only care about, let's get rid of this pain. Kind of like a fireman, if they come to your house and your house is on fire, they don't care about your drapes or your carpet or your front door. They're just going to bust in and take out the fire. Well, that's the case. And so firefighters are often like, they can be addictive things, like parts that are addictive, like, alcohol. Like if you binge drink, you're going to not feel things. If you binge play video games all night long, you're not going to feel anything, or you overeat, or whatever it is. So it could be an addictive kind of thing. It can be an angry kind of thing. They can be hostile and angry and critical. So firefighters usually take on, like this role to protect, but at all cost. And then, of course, there's fallout from that after.
So could a raging part against self be considered a firefighter?
Typically, yeah.
I'll give you a specific example. A woman that I walked with who every time she was happy or wanted something, parents would come and humiliate her and hit her. And so that's a really young part. It's like a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old part. But then there's this older part that whenever there was some threat of being happy or a threat of being humiliated, this part would come in and just rage at herself, just pummel her. Okay. Would that be considered a firefighter in that situation?
Yeah, sure sounds like that the older part is protecting. And so I guess I'd be curious to know, how did the 2-year-old, with the 2-year-old's resources, which are pretty limited, right? How did they cope with that? Hiding. So they have a part that hides. And then at some later point, once it sounds like this person got some kind of autonomy, their only option was to be mad at themselves, to vent at their own mistakes or what have you, because they still didn't have the option of challenging others, right? So hiding and self-hatred become the two coping means, probably of two different parts, and then you have that. So those parts, they sound like they would both be possibly firefighters, although it could be that the hiding one is a manager. It's not clear. Honestly, the category doesn't matter. Sometimes once you get in there and you're working with the part, that's what matters.
Yeah.
Is to understand how did that person learn to cope, and how can we help that part? Just like if you were meeting a 2-year-old now, or you're meeting a 10-year-old, or what the other age was, you're basically like to the 2-year-old to a 2-year-old. I know it sounds funny to say, but you're really relating to a part that's stuck in time as a 2-year-old. And you're like, you don't need to hide anymore. Let's help you so that you don't have to hide. Can we find a safe place for you? And really, the inmost self in that point is able to be the good and loving Christ-like parent that 2-year-old always needed. And so you bring that inmost self to work with the 2-year-old, to bring it into a place of love and safety. And you don't need to hide. And it's okay if you make a mistake. And we're going to show you how, if you make a mistake, we'll show you how you can fix it. And you're still loved, and you're still beautiful and wonderful and precious. And that 2-year-old has to learn to accept that and take that in. And that takes some work, and that takes some time and practice. And in that little inner house, you would make sure that 2-year-old had a beautiful room where they could stay, and you could check on them every single day and make sure they weren't hiding or didn't feel like they needed to hide. And then the same with the 10-year-old. Then you would look at them and figure out, okay, at 10, I couldn't stand up for myself. I definitely couldn't at 2, but I still can't at 10, so what would it mean now? Can I help you to share what you're really feeling, and to be able to say it in places that are safe and with people that will listen, and starting within your own internal system to do that. So yeah, no, those examples are.
I love this. And again, I'm trying to think of the listener who's the furthest behind in the pack of comprehension. and I'm trying to keep bringing them forward to join the masses. And again, what are we doing right now is discussing a way to relate to oneself and live out the principle of Jesus, where it says, love your neighbor as yourself. So, this as yourself section of that commandment, which is for our good, how in the heck do I love myself? This is a very highly thought through way to love and relate to oneself. And Gerry, I want to ask you in a moment, how do we notice our parts? Like, how do you notice a part is up? How do you know it's a part and not true self? How do you know one from the other? And so, listeners as well, something I'm conscious of that I want to highlight is, as human persons, we're made in the image and likeness of the Trinity, which is inherently three persons in perfect relationship. And so what we're doing here with parts work is activating this system within us that makes something within us relational. It's very hard to relate to an emotion if the phenomena of a part is simply an emotion. The approach to working with it is very different than if the phenomena is a 2-year-old, because now the relational centers of the human person get activated. And it's like, imagine relating to a 2-year-old is very different than imagine relating to sadness. It's like, I don't know what to do with this phenomena of sadness. But if it's a 2-year-old that's sad, oh, I have all these resources and things I can now do in the relation to myself. So again, do I literally have a room inside of my heart? And if a surgeon cut me open, he'd find a dollhouse? Like, no, okay, no, that's not it. If I had spiritual surgery, would there be some kind of spiritual reality that's invisible? Maybe, but it's more of a conceptualization whereby we relate to ourselves well so that we can love ourselves and in turn, like you said, Gerry, love God and our neighbor. And this is an essential part of the human person, is doing that. So I find it very hard to relate, like work with sadness. I go, okay, I'm not sure. Work with this part of me that I feels like is 8 years old and is sad. Oh, I instantly think of developmental things. What does an 8-year-old need to hear? What does an 8-year-old like to do? What would the 8-year-old's bedroom be like? How could I comfort the 8-year-old? There's tons of resources that come to the table at that point. So again, I'm always trying to bring the listener into this experience of going, oh my gosh, okay, this isn't crazy and weird. And this is helping me be holy. It's helping me actually navigate and learn my everyday life and prayer, like parts come up in prayer and et cetera, et cetera. So Gerry, how do we know I'm dealing with a part, a firefighter, as we've just described, or a manager or an exile, versus my true self? How do you know what's what?
Yeah, no, great question. One way in which I start with people to access parts is their body.
Okay.
And we are, soul is a form of the body. We're connected, body and soul. And so if we feel tension or some sensation or agitation, this was why EMDR training was so helpful to help me do that. You're connecting with some part, usually, unless it's like an actual physical, you've been hurt in some physical way, but you're dealing with a part and those emotions. So anything like that, like a physical sensation and emotion, can be what we'd call a trailhead. It's what they say in IFS, that leads you to the part. And so you connect in with the part that way. But I like how you said it, if you feel that sadness, and a lot of times somebody's feeling anxiety, they'll say they have pressure in their chest, or if they feel very guilty, they'll feel it in their pit of their stomach, or they might feel shoulders. So people have a lot of common ways in which they carry stuff. And so you're helping them connect from the physical body and the physical emotions into the interior world to see what parts are going on, what's going on there. The way that you can tell apart from the self, from the core self, is parts have agendas. They all have an agenda of some kind. So we know, so you have one part that's just like, I need a rest, or I need a break, or I need this person to stop talking, or I need to get done my job today, or I'm going to explode. So it has some kind of agenda it's trying to do. The self has no agenda other than possibly healing, harmony, love.
Huh.
That's pretty much its agenda. And so that's why it makes a wonderful leader, because it can see past all the parts as different agendas that are in conflict and just
Yeah.
be love. It reflects God. God is love.
Yes.
It's what it is. And so I think that's that compassion is, in IFS, Richard Schwartz came up with the 8 C's and the 5 P's. So you got compassion and calm and creativity and all these things. So they're qualities of the self.
Hmm.
But they're not agenda driven. They're just what it can share. And I would say, I would link it myself to the infused virtues of faith, hope, and love.
Huh.
That those virtues are what is the energy, if you will, the spiritual energy of the self, which feels really different from a part that has an agenda, that has a burden of some kind, that is working out of fear, that is working out of anxiety or whatever. And you can tell right away that's different than the self.
Yeah. I think somebody might have right now just gone, oh dear, I thought my true self, I think my true self that I've called my true self this whole time is actually a part. Like, that can be alarming when you realize you have this primary way of engaging in life. You go, oh, that's me. That's totally me. And some of us who've been around the block a few times go, I'm not so sure. I'm not, we kindly invite a deeper invitation. But
yeah, I was going to say, we're going to need to wind down here a little bit, but I want you to share a little bit about the book. And just as I reviewed it, Gerry, I was just so impressed with how much you've integrated in the psychological world and in the spiritual world and even in the devotional world. Like, you call it litanies of the heart throughout the book, and in the appendix you have litanies, and they're specifically addressing parts. So you want to talk some about the litanies as we wind down here?
Yeah, the litany prayers I developed a few years ago. So I developed those before I started the book, actually. Those prayers were written based on attachment theory. And attachment theory has 3 different insecure attachment styles. And I'm not going to get into it. You can look it up, and we explain it in the book, explain it on our website. But each of those prayers is designed to help a person go from an insecure attachment style, whether it's avoidance or anxiety or whatnot, to secure attachment with Christ. So that is the basis of those 3 litanies. And as I was working on the book, like one reason for the book was, hey, can I take IFS and ego state therapy and these parts work approaches and show how it truly is Catholic or Christian, like how it is essentially, that it isn't, I'm not just baptizing IFS. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to show that it's inherently true. It's inherently Christian. It reflects, like it was mentioned, the Trinity. It reflects the body of Christ, reflects this kingdom within that is mentioned in the Bible. And so that IFS or ego state, any of these secular theories have in some ways have errors related to them because they're secular and everything, or they're imperfect, right? And I wanted to show how this could be looked at in its fullness and how it can, so I had that intention of providing a Christian, a Catholic way of approaching parts work. And I didn't want just proof texts in the Bible. I actually did a deep dive. Each chapter is a deep dive into a different book of the Bible. And then, so there's that component. But I also had it as an intention to work with people. When I was thinking of audience, they keep telling you, okay, you have to your audience, helps ground me. As you probably can tell, I can go off into space and just love talking about interesting things to me. How do I bring it down to earth? And I love the way you do that throughout this podcast, Jake. Yeah. And that was, so my focus ended up being, okay, let me picture somebody with post-traumatic stress.
Nice.
Somebody who's struggling with an anxiety disorder. So I did kind of focus that way. And so I do tend to go with I try to approach it from like the more serious thing, the little stories in each chapter. Most of them are like pretty serious cases. Yeah. But the reality is we all have some trauma in our lives. I talk about this term, I use this term original trauma I came up with because I feel like we can't escape this world without trauma. Like the original trauma was Adam and Eve being separated from God and a disconnection between the two of them. So, and that led to, Cain and Abel and murder and all kinds of things. So we live in a world with trauma. We're affected by it. So we all are affected by anxiety. We all have insecurities, no matter how awesome we are, even no matter how amazing our families were or something like this. So I did hope that every person on some level would benefit from this book, and that it would help them because we all struggle with some levels of anxiety. So I had the dual purpose, helping people with anxiety and trauma, and helping show that it is truly a Christian way of working.
Yeah, you did that beautifully. How can they get it? How can they find your book?
Okay. So if you go to Sophia Institute Press, their website, you can look up the book and you can get it there. And that's the best place to go get it because we're giving more money to the author and the Catholic publisher. But good. If not, you can go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, and it's there in those different places. I'm hoping to have an Audible version out at some point in the future too.
That's cool.
And if you just want to see the litanies themselves, you can go to soulsandheart.com/lit. On our Souls and Hearts website, and you can actually download just the litany prayers, a PDF version. You can listen. We have English and Spanish versions, and you can just listen to the prayers yourself, or you can order the nice little prayer booklets that are pretty and nice.
Yeah.
So
that's very cool. So listeners, again, the book is Litanies of the Heart, Relieving Post-Traumatic Stress and Calming Anxiety Through Healing of Our Parts. And Gerry is Gerry, Crete, Crete. And Gerry, where can people find out about your practice?
Yeah, so transfigurationcounseling.com is the website. And we have multiple counselors and life coaches.
Very cool.
Oh, and we'll be having a run by 2 Catholic life coaches. We'll be doing a book study as well on like a small group study on Litanies of the Heart.
Oh, very cool. And when that starts fairly soon, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So where can listeners go to find out about that?
We'll be putting a post on transfigurationcounseling.com, my practice website.
Awesome. So listeners, tons of practicals, tons of resources. We'd highly encourage you to check out the book itself. And Gerry, thanks for letting me know that going through the actual website of the publisher is better than Amazon. I'm an Amazon guy, but I had no idea that helps you as well as the publisher. So cool. Good to know. And then soulsandhearts.com, transfigurationcounseling.com, and that's with one L, I'm assuming, because our Canadian listeners.
Yes, sorry. It's American spelling.
we just want to be good to all our British and our British English writers. But anyway, so transfigurationcounseling.com, soulsandhearts.com, and then you can find the book Litanies of the Heart. Gerry, thanks so much for being with us. This has been really cool. I hope to have you back and we can dive in deeper and nerd out more. And
I would love that. Just get me started on St. Maximus the Confessor, and that could be a whole episode.
Okay. See? It's exciting. I love it. It's awesome. So again, thank you so much. And listeners, we hope that this episode blessed you. Please check out the resources, and we will talk to you again soon.